We have a shocking update to a deadly case of child abuse allegedly at the hands of this grandmother. I want you to take a look at this picture that we have received from police in Tempe, Arizona. That is a cage inside of a home where the grandmother allegedly held a 13-year-old girl with special needs who lost her life. And in a major twist in this story that has been going on for most of 2025, the key suspect in this case, the grandmother, is now dead. What we've learned about what happened to her. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This story is really tough to stomach, as all stories are when it comes to cases of child abuse. But the victim in this story was a girl who deserved so much better. She was 13 years old, but she had a rare form of epilepsy. And according to police in Tempe, Arizona, she had the mental capacity of a 3-year-old. I want you to take a look at a picture of this young girl who lost her life. Her name was Melony Granados, and she certainly deserved to have people in her life, to have guardians in her life who cared for her and could get her help for the condition that she was born with. Instead, she was put in the care of her grandmother, 55-year-old Virginia Lujan. Police say that Melony and her 4 siblings were staying at their grandmother's house with their mom, Jami Hodges. I'll talk a lot more about her in just a moment. Now, on January 21st of this year, so when 2025 was very new, police say that Lujan called police to her house located in this apartment complex in Tempe. Melony was not breathing. Here's what the Tempe police chief said back in January per Fox 10 Arizona.
A search of the home uncovered horrible conditions, along with a makeshift cage filled with feces. Lujan and Melony's mother, Jami Hodges, admitted they kept her in a cage to maintain control of her. Hodges, the mother, had been temporarily staying at the home with her 5 children, 4 of whom were under Lujan's care. Hodges admitted she had not regularly seen Melony during this time and was unaware of a reported fall down the stairs that Lujan claimed occurred 2 days earlier. Lujan did not seek medical attention for Melony after the alleged fall, saying she believed that she would recover. We arrested 55-year-old Virginia Lujan, who is currently in custody. Melony's mother, 33-year-old Jami Hodges, was arrested and released pending charges. Both women face child abuse charges, and additional charges may follow as our investigation continues. The tragic loss of a child is a profound reminder of our shared responsibility to protect the most vulnerable in our community.
Here is the picture of that cage that was just released by Tempe police. It is horrifying to look at. That is a bunk bed concocted to be a jail cell. And that is where Melony Granados was allegedly held by her grandmother. Police say when they investigated Melony's body after her death, she had bruises and sores on her body, and they were in various stages of healing. That may mean the alleged abuse went on much longer than just a couple days before her death. Now, Lujan told police that Melony had fallen down the stairs a couple days prior to her calling 911, but she had thought that the incident would resolve itself on its own. So she didn't seek medical help for this young girl who certainly needed it. Now, Lujan did admit to law enforcement that she kept Melony in that cage because it was a way to control her. Who knows what the defense would have been had Lujan survived the time that she had spent in jail. I searched Virginia Lujan's name on truthfinder.com, and in the criminal history section, we saw that she has had several court cases against her throughout her life. She used to live in New Mexico, and we found that in 2006, she was sentenced to probation on an aggravated battery charge. Now, at Law&Crime, we partner at Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories, like Virginia Lujan. But even if you don't work in true crime, this can be a great tool because it can give you some peace of mind, because it's one of the largest public records search services in the United States. And with a paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Now, after police responded, Melony was rushed to the hospital, and that's where she died. They said they did life-saving efforts for hours, but they couldn't save her life. Police say the conditions inside that home, they were deplorable, that there was a terrible smell, that inside that cage, there were feces. And remember, there were several children, Melony's siblings, who had to live in that home as well. The children ranged in ages from 15 all the way down to 2 years old. All of the children but the 2-year-old were considered in the care of the grandmother, Virginia Lujan. The 2-year-old was in the care of Melony's mom, who's been identified by police as Jami Hodges. Now, Lujan was arrested and then she was indicted, charged with 2 counts of child abuse, 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence, 1 count of tampering with a witness, and 3 counts of contributing to the dependency of a child. She was held on a $500,000 bond. Now, Jami Hodges, that is the mom of Melony Granados, she was arrested and she was booked on a charge of child abuse. That's a Class 2 felony in Arizona. Police said that Hodges was aware, allegedly, of her daughter being held in that cage. She was booked, but she was also released pending charges, so handled very differently compared to Virginia Lujan. The police back in January were asked about that. Here is how they answered the question per Fox 10.
Hodges was released pending charges, and what that means is that she was booked for charges but released pending further investigation. So right now she did make some statements, but there were more that could be followed up with her statements. They weren't exactly as concise as her holding the child in the cage. So there is still more to investigate with her.
As of today, it doesn't appear that there's really been any movement in Hodges' case. Her name does not come up in Maricopa County court records, so it is unclear if she will be prosecuted for what allegedly happened to Melony Granados. Roughly 9 months after Granados died, the medical examiner ruled the 13-year-old's death a homicide. That is according to ABC 15 in Phoenix, Arizona. The television station says the Tempe Police Department was waiting on the medical examiner's report before filing more charges in the case, and that leads us to the next big twist in this story. Virginia Lujan will not be prosecuted because she's dead. She died in the hospital at the beginning of September, according to local media. Now, foul play is not suspected in the case. Reportedly, police say the grandma died of natural causes. She had been rushed to the hospital and then she died. So now the question's raised, what happens next? There's still so many questions in this story about how long the abuse went on inside that home. We also don't officially know the cause of death for Melony Granados. And of course, there's the question of what's going to happen to Melony's mom, Jami Hodges. Will she be prosecuted in connection to this case? All of that is still unclear. And now Virginia Lujan, the key suspect, is dead. Tempe police have said that Melony Granados' death is still an active investigation. Melony's 4 siblings are now in the custody of the Arizona Department of Child Services. Joining us more to talk about this is practice professor of law at Temple University in Philadelphia, Marion Bracha. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, even in cases like this that are just so disturbing. What was your reaction? I mean, when you worked in a prosecutor's office, you had to prosecute some very difficult cases, but just what's your reaction when you see that picture of the cage?
Chris, you never get used to seeing circumstances and evidence of a child being abused or injured or mistreated in any way, no matter how many cases you handle. And I bet every investigator and prosecutor in the world would say the same thing to you. If you get to the point where you are desensitized to it and it doesn't touch you in a really visceral way, it's probably time for a new profession. So you never are unaffected by images like that.
Yeah, and I know police had said back in January that they were just shaken. And then, I remember when the story first dropped and then it was talking about this cage, and then to see it several months later, it's just really hard to think about what this girl went through. Virginia Lujan, who's the grandmother, and she was arrested. She was facing a child abuse charge, a Class 2 felony in Arizona, and she was in custody and she passes away from natural causes. I know police have said the investigation's ongoing. There are still a lot of questions as far as what happened inside the home, but knowing that your prime suspect is dead, I mean, how does that impact what happens next?
Yeah, so the options are limited when the prime suspect or the lead suspect is no longer available to be prosecuted. So I'm sure that the attorneys are looking at who else was involved in the care of this child, who else may have had access to her, who else may have had custody or any kind of supervisory responsibility over her. Even the social services supports and departments who ostensibly would have been involved in her care and oversight. But really, criminally speaking, if the grandmother was alleged to have been the primary source of this injury and this abuse, then the options really are limited to the prosecutors at this point.
And before I get to Jami Hodges, who is the mother of Melony, the girl who passed away, and some of the questions about whether she could face prosecution, I know in it just being 2 weeks ago, they said that this was a homicide. What do you make of that timeline that it took? I mean, this was in January, this girl dies, and then here we are it was late September, early October, that we learned that this was a homicide, and she wasn't facing murder charges at the time she died.
Well, I would say that timeline isn't necessarily egregious, an egregiously long time for an investigation to unfold. There has to be time for the medical examiner or the coroner to do their investigation, to issue a report, to issue an opinion on the cause and manner of death. Then that information needs to be passed on to, in Arizona, the county attorney. They are elected officials. They are the elected officials who are responsible for deciding the charges, if any, that should attach to any alleged offender. So there is a series of, it may sound like bureaucratic process, but there are several stakeholders in the process to handle the investigation, to perpetuate the investigation, and then to pass on the fruits of that investigation to the authorities who have decision-making authority as to whether or not a criminal case will ensue. So it all sounds like it was following the ordinary process. It may feel like an extended period of time. 9 months may feel like a long time to do justice to a juvenile decedent, but ultimately we want each of these players in this system to do a thorough and comprehensive job. And it sounds like they were doing everything that they felt needed to be done to properly handle this investigation.
And if the grandmother was still alive, it seems like, I mean, just based off the picture, I imagine you'd show that picture to a jury, and that would be a pretty strong case for the prosecution. She had said that Melony had fallen down the stairs a couple days prior to her calling 911, and that she thought she was just going to be okay. Also, police have said that there were sores and bruises on the girl's body that were in various stages of healing. For the prosecutors in this case, if the defense was saying, actually, the cage may not look, I'm just trying to think of what the defense might say, where they might try to explain away the cage, which I know would be very hard, but then they were saying this was an accident and she just thought the girl was going to be okay. How does the fact that she has other bruises on her body, how strong of an argument would that have been for the prosecution if this case had gone forward?
Yeah, I think the other injuries are very, very telling in this case. And again, I think that's why they were likely giving the homicide investigators, the ME's office or the coroner's office, the time and the space they needed to do a full and fair investigation. Because if there were other injuries or scars, bruises that were in various stages of healing, they would want to establish a timeline. They'd want to be able to say when a first injury or when injuries were inflicted over a period of time. And that goes to prove what's known in the statutes as a course of conduct. That would go to show that a one-time fall down the steps or a one-time injury wasn't actually the existence of this 13-year-old child, that she was actually exposed to a course, to a series of injuries that would tend to prove intent by her caregiver to cause serious bodily harm or to neglect her in such a way that would eventually lead to her death.
And the charge that Virginia Lujan was facing at the time of her arrest, it was this child abuse charge. And then now we've learned that the state did consider this a homicide. What is how does a child abuse charge and what you would have to prove there compare to what you would have to prove in a case of child abuse where she was murdered, according to the ME's office?
Right. Well, first-degree murder is the most serious crime that is in our criminal statutes. That is an intentional, premeditated, and malicious taking of another human life. That is very difficult to prove. Intent can be proven, can be shown, again, through course of conduct, but premeditated, oftentimes we have this very Hollywood notion of what premeditation is. We think about, this villainous figure who's sitting hatching a plan. Premeditation can actually happen very quickly. The example we usually give jurors, if a fly or an insect lands on your hand and you decide to smack it away, in the instant that it takes you to make that decision to smack it away or to crush it on your hand, that is considered or can be considered premeditation by a fact finder. And then the maliciousness is really, the malice is really the question for the homicide charge. Is there that cold-heartedness? Is there that depravity? Is there that disregard for the value of human life? I'd argue that, I would suspect that the prosecutors in this case would argue that the presence of that cage is evidence of malice, or the hardness of heart, that coldness of heart, and that disregard for the value of human life. But there are elements of a homicide charge that do not appear in the statutory elements for child abuse. So there is more to be proven for a homicide than there would be for an assault or an abuse charge.
At the time that Virginia Lujan was arrested, her daughter, who's the mother of Melony Granados, who's the victim in this case, this 13-year-old girl, Jami Hodges, the mom, she's facing, was arrested on a child abuse, which is a Class 2 felony in Arizona. But there's really been nothing since. She was released, booked and released, and she's not in the Maricopa County, court records from what I've seen, where her mom was, Virginia Lujan. So why would be the reason that there's really been no movement between the time of her arrest, but then not seeing any charges in court records?
Well, I think that shows that the prosecuting authority, that the county attorney in Arizona did not make a charging decision or had not come to a charging decision as of yet. And so unless and until they decide to issue a criminal complaint against the mother and generate a docket number against the mother that would appear in the court system, then technically they have not formally charged her. And again, that charging authority rests with the county attorney in Arizona. So I would think that they are still either reviewing evidence or deciding whether or not a case can proceed against the mother now without the presence of the grandmother and certainly without the presence of the decedent, the child. But again, that decision making has to go through the county attorney's office. And I don't want to say it's not enough that she was booked by the police department, but that is just one step in the process toward a charging decision.
I know there's the line, right to a speedy trial. It's been 9 months. Does that vary from state to state as far as how quickly a prosecutor's office would have to make a decision of whether or not they were moving forward with charges?
It does vary from state to state, and a lot of it is determined by case law. And so there are various motions that can be filed by the defense to say that there was a delay pre-charging or a delay before the criminal complaint was filed, and that delay put the defense at a significant disadvantage to either present a defense or to find witnesses or to be able to confirm an alibi, so to speak. So there are certainly considerations that both the defense and the prosecution should take, should be considering in that time in between the alleged crime, the police investigation, and ultimately when charges are attached.
Because I know, because I think of this mother's, from her perspective, and if you were her defense attorney, it's okay, so she hasn't, she was arrested on, according to the police, child abuse, but then there's been no movement on it whatsoever. As theoretically, how long could authorities take to make a decision of whether or not, new evidence comes forward and maybe this, decision that it was actually a homicide could move the case forward? Does it get to a point where they have to say, we're not bringing charges and we'll never bring charges ever again related to this incident, it's closed?
As far as I know, the one and only statute that does not have a statute of limitations is a homicide charge. So for charges like child abuse and other assaults and other endangerment charges against children, there is a statute of limitations, and so the prosecutors would be limited by that, and again by various case law that would that the defense could argue would have put them at a disadvantage to develop a defense because of a pre-charging delay.
And we'll never know what Virginia Lujan's defense would have been in a trial because she's dead. But you had this cage. It seems like there was pretty strong evidence. Typically when you in cases that you've prosecuted, I mean, how do defense attorneys go about when they're facing a lot of evidence against their client? I mean, what's the strategy that they can take in a case where it did seem, I mean, when you have just the conditions that police were describing, how do you defend somebody like that?
Well, I think what is particularly damning, or what could have been damning for Virginia Lujan was that I believe she made an admission herself that she used the cage in order to protect her granddaughter. I believe her granddaughter had a cognitive delay, and it sounded like she was trying to make a case for herself that this was to restrain or to protect the granddaughter, to keep her from harming herself. I would say without that admission, which is, again, a pretty significant and damning admission had it gone to trial. Without that, there could have always been an argument that this cage was there for some other reason. Maybe it was a storage unit, maybe it was to house animals or other items, but that it was never intended for human habitation, that the child, the 13-year-old, never went inside this structure. Now, of course, if the prosecutor had the statement from the grandmother that said this is what we were using it for, now that would be admissible against her and would be evidence that the child was actually placed in that cage, or that it was intended for her. The only other thing I could say at that point is that while perhaps personally I don't consider it a very strong defense, but perhaps the defense would be there was not a malicious intent. If the grandmother really is saying that she was trying to keep the child from harming herself or keep her restrained, or that she had certain behavioral issues that led her to, outward behaviors that were again harming herself or others, that was really the intention behind the cage. Again, that's probably received with a furrow of the brow, if you will. But I could imagine a world where the defense says you need to prove premeditation, intentionality, and malice, and the malicious intent just wasn't there in this case.
There were several other children, 4 other children who are inside that home. I believe they're in CPS custody now. But in these types of cases, I mean, what is the future for these kids? I mean, what is life like once they're in the system, and what happens now?
Well, the only thing I can hope is that there are other family members, or that there are other stable, safe people in these children's lives who can take them in, who will give them the care and the regard and the support that they deserve and that they are so desperately in need of. We can only hope that there is that support system available to these children. And as you know, Chris, and as I certainly know, that is something that is horribly lacking in our foster system and in our social service support system. So I'm hoping that for the siblings and the remaining children in this family, that there is a much happier outcome.
Yeah, just a shocking case. I mean, just so chilling just to think about that picture that law enforcement put out. And we'll see if there's any other pieces of information now that we've seen this development with Virginia Lujan passing away in jail in Arizona. Practice professor of law at Temple University, Marian Bracha. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. I know these stories aren't easy to talk about. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Have a great day.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.